Everyone thinks they know the French Revolution. Angry mobs, guillotines, liberty, equality, fraternity. But that's the highlight reel, not the cause. Here is what your history class left out. The French Revolution did not start in the streets. It started in the spreadsheet. Before the first head rolled, France was already drowning in debt so deep it could not borrow its way out. The Bastille fell after the balance sheet did. And if that sounds uncomfortably familiar, it should. Before we get into it, drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Seriously, I want to see how far this story travels, because what broke France in 1789 is a pattern that shows up everywhere. If you are already learning something new, hit like. It tells the algorithm you are here for real history, not the sanitized textbook version. Let's rewind. Picture France in the early 1700s. On the surface, magnificent Paris was the cultural capital of the world. French art, fashion, language, cuisine, Europe wanted to be France. But underneath that elegance, the economy was rotting from the inside. King Louis XIV had spent obscene amounts of money building the Palace of Versailles and waging wars across Europe. He died leaving behind not a fortune but a mountain of debt. His heirs didn't inherit wealth, they inherited obligations. By 1780, France owed over 4 billion livres. That number was effectively unpayable given the country's tax base. And here's the gut punch. The interest payments alone ate up half the annual national budget. Half, before they spent a single dollar on roads, armies, or bread. But the debt was not the only problem. The way France collected taxes made everything worse. The richest people in the country, the clergy and the nobility, paid almost nothing. The heaviest tax burden fell entirely on farmers, merchants, and workers. Sound familiar? Imagine if today's billionaires paid zero in taxes while small businesses got crushed with an 80% rate. That was France in 1788. Every reform effort failed because the same elites, who would have been taxed, also controlled the courts and regional parliaments. They killed every proposal. But debt does not care about politics, it just compounds. France's financial crisis did not happen overnight. It was death by 1,000 wars. The 7 Years' War ended in 1763, had already hollowed out the treasury. Then came America. France spent over 1.3 billion livres supporting the American Revolution. The goal was to weaken Britain, their longtime rival, and strategically worked. Britain lost the colonies, but France paid a catastrophic price. Its own financial system collapsed in the process. French soldiers came home as heroes. The French government came home bankrupt. Then Finance Minister Jacques Necker did something radical. He published the royal accounts for the public to see. For the first time in French history, ordinary people could look at the numbers themselves. The reaction was not gratitude, it was rage. If the kingdom was so rich, why was bread unaffordable? If the king was so wise, why were peasants starving? Publishing those accounts turned a financial crisis into a political one, and a political crisis into fury. By 1788, the government did what every modern administration does when it is out of options. It tried to borrow more. But European lenders had lost confidence. French bond prices tanked, interest rates spiked, fresh credit dried up. The tax base was exhausted. Inflation crept higher, and then nature got involved. A series of brutal harvests wiped out grain supplies across France. Bread prices tripled. Bread, the foundation of the French diet, suddenly costs more than most families could afford. While aristocrats held lavish feasts at Versailles, peasants were starving. Every empire eventually learns this lesson. When the cost of food rises faster than wages, you do not get protests. You get revolutions. Paris reached its boiling point. But here's the thing most people miss. The rage on the streets was real, but the failure that caused it had happened long before, quietly, in ledgers and accounting offices. Economists call it a liquidity trap, a point where a government can no longer borrow, tax, or print its way forward. Historians call it the breaking point. In France, it started with one structural decision that had never been corrected: the refusal to tax the wealthy. By 1789, Louis XVI was completely out of moves. His advisors convinced him to call the Estates General a National Assembly that had not met in 175 years. The hope was negotiation. What they got was mutiny. Representatives of the Third Estate, everyone outside the nobility and clergy, refused to play the old game. They declared themselves the true government, the National Assembly. Notice what triggered it: not philosophy, not a desire for democracy. Insolvency. When the monarchy collapsed, the revolutionaries did not just inherit power. They inherited a completely broken economy. The treasury was empty. Credit markets were frozen. Gold was leaving the country fast. The new government could not tax fast enough to feed armies or buy grain. So, they turned to a radical experiment. They would create money out of land. France had just seized over 6 million hectares of property from the church and nobility. On paper, this was enormous wealth, but you can't pay a baker in farmland. So, the government issued paper notes called Assignats backed by that confiscated land. Each note represented a claim on that future value. At first, it worked. The assignats circulated widely. People accepted them. Trade resumed. Markets breathed again. But here's the problem with paper money. Once you start printing, it's almost impossible to stop. The government kept finding new reasons to print more, pay the army, subsidize bread, fund city operations. Soon, the assignats weren't backed by land anymore. They were promises built on promises. By 1793, the government had flooded the economy with over 8 billion livres worth of assignats. Prices exploded. Bread that once cost 4 sous now cost 12. A pair of shoes that used to cost a week's wages now cost a month's pay. Inflation hit savers hardest. It rewarded speculators. It destroyed trust. Merchants started hoarding goods. Farmers refused to sell grain for paper, and ordinary French citizens who genuinely believed that they'd been liberated from royal exploitation found themselves crushed by something invisible and merciless. Inflation. The National Convention tried to fight inflation with laws. They froze prices, banned hoarding, and labeled merchants who raised prices as enemies of the Republic. Bakers were sent to the guillotine for charging too much. But here is the hard truth. Policy cannot override scarcity. The more they printed, the faster value evaporated. No law can manufacture trust once it is gone. There is a deep irony here. The same revolution that overthrew a king for fiscal mismanagement proceeded to make every identical mistake just faster. The revolutionaries believed that political purity could defeat mathematics. They were wrong. And as the financial system unraveled, the political system did too. Factions started blaming each other. The Girondins accused the Jacobins of corruption. The Jacobins accused merchants of hoarding. The Committee of Public Safety used the chaos to justify mass executions. Monetary collapse did not just cause economic suffering. It created the paranoia that fueled the reign of terror. Fiscal failure and mass violence were not separate stories. They were the same story. By 1794, the printing presses had never stopped running. Total assignats issued over 45 billion livres. Inflation exceeded 13,000%. A single loaf of bread costs more than a full day's wages. Gold coins vanished. People literally started bartering again, trading goods directly because no one trusted paper. When money fails, everything fails with it. The financial catastrophe ultimately set the stage for one man. Napoleon Bonaparte understood what the revolutionaries had refused to accept. Power requires stable credit. Ideals do not pay armies. In 1800, Napoleon founded the Bank of France, a hybrid institution, part public, part private, designed to restore confidence and control money creation. He also restored a currency backed by real metal, silver and gold. For ordinary French citizens who had lived through a decade of economic chaos, this was not just financial policy, it felt like peace. The lesson Napoleon applied was brutal in its simplicity. Revolutions without currency control collapse into tyranny or dependency. You cannot build a new society on worthless paper. France's economic collapse did not stay within its borders. What happened between 1789 and 1799 permanently reshaped how the entire world thinks about money. For the first time, investors watched a government weaponize the printing press and destroy an entire currency in real time. European lenders never forgot. When Latin American nations sought loans decades later, London banks demanded higher interest rates. The memory of France made every new republic a credit risk. The idea of separating money creation from direct political control. That came directly from watching what happens when populism runs the printing press. The Bank of England gained new prestige. Central banks, once rare, multiplied across Europe. These institutions were designed to manage credit at arm's length from politics. Not perfectly, but enough. Economists like David Ricardo and, later, John Maynard Keynes studied France's collapse and built modern monetary theory around it. They understood what the revolutionaries had refused to believe. Currency is not wealth, it's a claim on wealth. When the claims exceed what is actually there, the system breaks. France also forced the reinvention of taxation. Before 1789, taxes were privileges negotiated by social class. After the revolution, taxes became universal obligations tied to citizenship. This created a modern fiscal state. Everyone contributes, everyone gets representation. But here is the cruel twist. The volatility created by the revolution did not eliminate privilege. It just changed who held it. The people who mastered the chaos, traders, speculators, financiers who understood paper markets became the new elite, not based on birth, but based on balance sheets. The revolution replaced one aristocracy with another. It just changed the entry requirements. You might be thinking, okay, interesting history, but why should I care? Here is why. Every modern nation faces the exact same temptations France faced. When crises hit, recessions, pandemics, wars, printing money looks easy. Politicians promise stimulus, debt relief, and social programs, but behind every promise is the same arithmetic that destroyed France. If what you are spending does not eventually match what you are producing, paper fills the gap, and paper without trust turns to dust. Look at Argentina, Venezuela, Zimbabwe. Each followed France's exact playbook: deficit, currency debasement, collapse. Every single time, leadership claimed their situation was unique. Every single time, the math proved otherwise. Economics doesn't have a political ideology, it only measures balance. When the US Federal Reserve expands its balance sheet, or when Congress debates the debt ceiling, or when inflation hits 8%, these are not abstract policy debates. They are modern versions of the same questions France could not answer in 1789. How much debt is sustainable? When does borrowing become a trap? When does temporary become permanent? The French Revolution did not answer those questions. It just showed everyone what happens when you get them catastrophically wrong. There's one final layer to this story that most people miss completely. Before the French Revolution, money was objective. You could weigh it. Gold and silver had physical, tangible value independent of government promises. After the Assignats, something fundamental shifted. Value became subjective, rooted not in metal but in trust, faith in the institution, belief in stability. That shift made modern capitalism possible. Think about it. Stock markets, corporate bonds, mortgage-backed securities, credit systems, all of this work because people believe that a piece of paper or a number on a screen represents real value. That's the same leap of faith the Assignats demanded. France's experiment failed, but it proved the concept. Without France's catastrophic failure, modern finance might not exist in its current form. The pain built the precedent. Here is what I want you to take away from all of this. The French Revolution is usually taught as a moral story, the oppressed rising against the powerful, liberty defeating tyranny. And that is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Underneath all of it was a balance sheet implosion. Numbers triggered the mobs. Inflation turned reformers into tyrants. The attempt to print prosperity created one of history's most devastating examples of economic self-destruction. The revolution didn't just destroy a monarchy. It accidentally invented modern monetary policy by showing the entire world what not to do. Next time you hear a debate about deficit spending, interest rates, or inflation, remember Perez in 1793? Remember Breadland stretching around the block while the government printed fresh promises? Remember how quickly a society unravels when the numbers stop adding up? And ask yourself this: are modern economies actually smarter than revolutionary France? Or are we just repeating the same mistakes with better printers? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this video gave you a new way of looking at history or at your own economy, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because the next episode covers how the early American Republic avoided France's fate and what it actually cost to pull that off. Thanks for watching all the way through. I'll see you in the next one.